If you're in your 40s right now and you do not have a real plan, I need you to hear this clearly. You have about 10 years left to fix this, and most people waste every single one of them. I've spent my entire career making concentrated bets on where money is moving next. And I can tell you that your 40s are not the time to relax. They are the most dangerous, most important decade of your entire financial life. This is the decade where you either build the machine that sets you free in your 50s, or you quietly lock yourself into working until you are 70. There's no in between. The choices you make in the next few years about your income, your investments, your debt, and your risk will decide whether you retire early and free or retire. So before you close this video, I want you to understand exactly what separates the people who get out in their 50s from the people who are still grinding in their 60s. It is not luck. It is not some secret stock. It is a small number of decisions made with discipline over and over again. Let's get into it. Before I go further, I want to say something directly. What I am about to walk you through is not fluff. This is the same thinking I used managing billions of dollars, broken down into something anyone can actually use. It is worth a lot more than the few seconds it takes to hit subscribe. If you want the rest of what I have to say, and the videos I put out after this one that build on it, subscribe now. It costs you nothing, and it means you will not miss the next piece of this puzzle. All right, let's talk about the first thing you need to fix. The first thing you need to do in your 40s is stop lying to yourself about where you actually stand. I have watched brilliant people lose fortunes, not because they made one bad trade, but because they refused to look honestly at their position until it was too late. Most people in their 40s have never actually calculated their number. I do not mean a vague idea like I want to be comfortable. I mean an actual figure, the amount of money that needs to be working for you so you can stop trading your time for a paycheck. You take what you spend every year and you multiply it by roughly 25. That is a rough estimate of what your investments need to reach so they can support you using a safe withdrawal rate. Most people have never done this simple bit of math, and because they have never done it, they have no idea if they are on track or 10 years behind. You cannot manage a position you refuse to look at. I built my career on knowing exactly where I stood at all times, what I owned, what I owed, and how much room I had to be wrong. You need to do the same with your own life. Sit down this week, add up every account, every property, every debt, and get one true number. Then calculate your real number, the target you are aiming for. Once you have those two figures next to each other, you will know exactly how much ground you have to cover, and more importantly, how much time you actually have in your 40s. You still have compounding on your side, but it is shrinking every single year. You wait. A dollar invested at 30 has nearly 40 years to grow. That same dollar invested at 45 has maybe 20 years, less than half the runway. This is not meant to scare you into panic. It is meant to snap you out of denial. The people who retire wealthy in their 50s are not the ones who got lucky with timing. They are the ones who confronted their real numbers early enough to still do something about it. So stop guessing. Stop telling yourself you will figure it out later. Get the number, face the gap, and let that gap become the thing that drives every decision you make from here forward. This single step, brutal honesty about where you stand, is the foundation everything else in this video is built on top of, and skipping it is the number one reason people wake up at 55 with nothing but regret and a retirement account that cannot support them. I also want you to understand something about how gaps like this actually get closed, because most people misunderstand it completely. They assume the gap gets closed by some single dramatic event, a windfall, an inheritance, a stock that goes to the moon. In my experience, that is almost never how it happens. The gap closes through a series of unremarkable, disciplined decisions repeated for years, each one small on its own, each one meaningless in isolation, but devastating in combination when you finally add them all up a decade later. So once you know your number and your gap, do not sit there waiting to feel motivated or inspired. Build a simple, boring system, an automatic amount that moves into investments every single month before you ever see it in your checking account. and let that system run in the background of your life regardless of how you feel that particular week. The people I have watched build real wealth are not the ones who had brilliant insight once. They are the ones who behaved the same disciplined way month after month for years, while everyone around them was either panicking or getting overconfident. That consistency, more than any single decision, is what actually closes the gap you just identified. The second thing I want you to understand is one of the biggest mistakes I see people make with their money in their 40s, and it is the opposite of what most financial advice tells you. Most advice tells you to diversify everything, spread your money thin across dozens of funds, and never take a real position in anything. I built my entire career doing the opposite. When I had genuine conviction, backed by real research and real understanding, I did not spread that bet thin across 50 different things. I concentrated on it because I understood it deeply enough to know I was right. Now, I am not telling you to go bet your retirement on a single bet stock you heard about from a friend. That is not conviction, that is gambling. And there is a massive difference between the two. What I am telling you is that broad diversification across things you do not understand is not safe. It is often just a way of guaranteeing mediocre results. In your 40s, you likely have one or two areas of real expertise: your industry, your profession, a skill you spent 20 years building. That expertise is an edge that almost nobody else has. If you work in healthcare, you understand healthcare trends before the general public does. If you work in technology, you see shifts in that industry years before they hit the mainstream news. This is where real conviction can be built, not from a hot tip, but from decades of lived experience inside a field. Where most people in their 40s go wrong is they take their hard-earned money and hand it over to strategies they do not understand, chasing whatever performed well last year, jumping from one trend to the next with no real conviction behind any of it. That is the worst of both worlds. You get the risk of concentration without the reward of actually knowing what you were doing. My advice is simple. Build the core of your portfolio in broad, low-cost index funds, because for most people, most of the time, that is the smartest default. But then take the knowledge you have built over your career and use a portion of your capital where you genuinely understand something better than the market does. That could be real estate in a market you know intimately. It could be a stake in a business in your industry. It could be your own company. The point is, do not confuse spreading your money everywhere with actually managing risk. Real risk management is understanding what you own and why you own it, sizing your positions based on how much conviction you actually have, and being honest when you do not have an edge at all in your 40s. You finally have enough life experience to know which areas you truly understand. Use that. Stop pretending that ignorance spread across 40 different funds is somehow safer than knowledge concentrated in a few places you actually understand. This is one of the biggest shifts that separates people who build real wealth from people who just accumulate a little bit of everything and end up with nothing. That truly compounds. There is also a discipline side to this that people skip, and it might be the more important half. Having conviction is not enough on its own. You also need a rule for when you are wrong. Every position I ever took had a point at which, if the facts changed or the thesis broke down, I got out. No ego, no hoping it would come back. Most individual investors do the exact opposite. They hold their winners for quick, nervous profit and hold their losers forever, hoping to get back to even, which is one of the most expensive habits in all of investing. In your 40s, with real money on the line and less time to recover from a serious mistake, you cannot afford that habit. Before you put meaningful capital into anything, decide in advance what would prove you wrong and commit to actually acting on it. If that happens, this single discipline, knowing your exit before you ever make the entry, will save you from far more damage over the next 10 years than any single brilliant pick will ever earn you. The third thing, and this is where I see people waste an enormous amount of time and energy, is that almost everyone in their 40s is obsessed with cutting expenses, and almost nobody is obsessed with Growing income. Yes, you should not be wasteful, but there is a hard limit to how much you can cut. You cannot cut your way to a number with 6 or 7 zeros in it. There is no ceiling on what you can earn. I never built anything meaningful by clipping coupons. I built it by finding where the biggest opportunities were and putting real effort and capital toward them. In your 40s, you are usually at the peak of your earning potential, or very close to it. You have experience, relationships, and credibility that a 25-year-old simply does not have yet. This is exactly the decade to be aggressive about increasing what you earn, not the decade to start coasting. Look at your current income and ask yourself honestly, is this the ceiling of what I am capable of? Or is this just the path of least resistance I've been on for years? For a lot of people, the answer is that they have been on autopilot in a job that pays them a fraction of what their skills are actually worth. If that is you, the fix might be as direct as switching companies. Since people who move jobs strategically, almost always, out-earn people who stay loyal to one employer for decades, it might mean negotiating harder than you ever have because most people never ask for what they are actually worth. It might mean building a second stream of income using the exact expertise we just talked about in the last section. Consulting, freelancing, or starting something small on the side that uses skills you already have. The people who retire wealthy in their 50s almost always have more than one source of income by the time they hit their late 40s. They are not relying on a single paycheck and hoping the market does the rest of the work. They treat their own earning power as an asset, just like a stock or a property, something to actively grow rather than something fixed. So here is what I want you to do. Take 1 hour this week and write down every possible way you could increase your income over the next 12 months. Not vague ideas, actual concrete paths, a raise you could negotiate, a skill you could add that makes you more valuable, a side business built on what you already know. Then pick the one with the best combination of impact and speed and commit real effort to it for the next 90 days. Growing your income even 10 or 15% a year on top of disciplined saving and investing compounds into a massive difference by the time you hit your 50s. This is the lever most people ignore because cutting expenses feels safer and more controllable. But playing defense your entire life will never make you wealthy. At some point, you have to play offense. And your 40s, with all the experience and credibility you have built, is exactly the decade to do it. The fourth thing I want to cover is debt and leverage, because this is where I see people in their 40s make some of the most costly mistakes of their entire lives. There are two completely different ways people use debt, and the difference between them is the difference between building wealth and destroying it. The first way is using debt to fund consumption, cars you cannot afford, credit card balances that roll over month to month, lifestyle spending disguised as normal life. This kind of debt is a wealth destroyer, full stop, because it is borrowing against your future to pay for things that lose value the moment you buy them. If you are carrying high-interest consumer debt in your 40s, that has to be priority number one to eliminate before almost anything else on this list, because no investment return reliably beats the interest you are paying on that debt. The second way people use debt is entirely different, using leverage to acquire assets that can appreciate or generate income, a rental property, a stake in a business, a mortgage on a primary residence that builds equity, instead of paying rent forever. This kind of debt, used carefully, is one of the most powerful tools for building wealth that exists, because it lets you control an asset that is larger than the cash you actually have and let that asset's growth work in your favor. The mistake I see constantly is people using this second, more powerful kind of debt with the discipline of the first, reckless kind. They over-leverage. They take on more than they can comfortably service if their income dips or interest rates rise. And one bad year turns what should have been a wealth-building tool into a financial disaster. My rule throughout my career was always to know exactly how much I could lose and to never let a single position put me in a position where I could not recover. Apply that same thinking to your own life. If you use leverage to buy a property or grow a business, make sure you can service that debt, even if things go worse than expected for a stretch, not just in the best case scenario. In your 40s, You likely have more borrowing power than you have ever had because of your income and your credit history. But that borrowing power is a tool, not free money, and it needs to be pointed at things that build your net worth, not things that drain it. So take an honest look at every debt you are carrying right now. Separate it into two piles: debt that is funding a lifestyle and debt that is funding an asset. Attack the first pile aggressively. Be strategic and disciplined about the second. Getting this distinction right in your 40s is one of the clearest lines between the people who retire wealthy in their 50s and the people who are still servicing bad debt from decisions they made 20 years earlier. There is one more piece of this that people rarely talk about, and that is the emotional side of leverage. Debt does not just cost you money, it costs you flexibility. And flexibility is one of the most valuable things you can own. In your 40s, when too much of your income is committed to servicing debt every month, you lose the ability to take a good opportunity when it appears because all your capacity is already spoken for. I always wanted enough room in my own position that if something unexpected happened, good or bad, I could actually respond to it. Ask yourself honestly whether your current debt load leaves you that kind of room, or whether it has quietly boxed you into a corner where you have no choice but to keep working exactly the same job at exactly the same pace for the next 20 years just to keep up with payments. If that is your situation, fixing it needs to move to the top of your list, above almost every other item on this video, because no investment strategy in the world works well from a position with no room to breathe. The last major piece I want to walk you through is what actually needs to be in place by the end of your 40s for your 50s to be the payoff decade instead of just more of the same grind. Everything we have talked about, knowing your real number, concentrating around real conviction, growing your income aggressively, and using leverage wisely, all of it is building toward one outcome: options. Wealth is not really about a specific number in an account. It is about having options that most people do not have. The option to walk away from work you no longer want to do, the option to take care of the people you love without stress, the option to spend your time exactly how you choose. By the time you are approaching your 50s, you want your investments generating real, growing income on their own, separate from your job, so that your paycheck becomes optional rather than necessary. That might come from dividend-paying investments, rental income, a business that runs without you having to be in it every single day, or some combination of all three. You also want your major expenses under control by this point. Ideally, a home that is paid off or close to it so that your monthly cost of living drops significantly, right, as your investment income is ramping up. Those two things happening at the same time, income rising while expenses fall, is exactly what creates the gap that lets people retire early. On top of that, do not ignore the boring stuff that people love to skip. Proper insurance, so one bad event cannot wipe out everything you have built, an updated estate plan so your money goes exactly where you want it to, and a real relationship with a good accountant who helps you keep more of what you earn instead of giving unnecessary amounts away in taxes every year. I have seen brilliant investors lose more to poor tax planning than they ever lost in the market. None of this is complicated, but all of it requires you to actually sit down and do it, rather than assuming it will sort itself out. The people who reach their 50s wealthy are not smarter than everyone else. They are simply the ones who treated their 40s as the decade of preparation instead of the decade of coasting. They faced their numbers honestly. They concentrated around real knowledge instead of chasing trends. They grew their income instead of just trimming their spending. They used debt like a tool instead of a trap. And they built real income-producing assets instead of just watching a number grow on a screen. That is the entire formula. It is not flashy, and it will not make headlines, but it works over and over again for anyone disciplined enough to actually follow it. So here is my challenge to you. Do not just watch this video and move on with your day like nothing happened. Pick one thing from everything I just walked you through: your real number, your concentration versus diversification, your income growth, your debt to your income producing assets, and take one real action on it in the next 7 days. Not next month, not when things calm down, 7 days. The people who are wealthy in their 50s are not the ones who understood the theory the best. They are the ones who actually acted on it while there was still time for it to compound. Your 40s do not last forever, and the decisions you make right now are quietly compounding in one direction or the other, whether you are paying attention or not. Make sure they are compounding in your favor. If this helps you see your own situation more clearly, make sure you are subscribed, because I am going to keep breaking down exactly how to think about money the way I approached it for decades. And I do not want you to miss what comes next. I will see you in the next one.